Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to take a look at some of the culminating lessons of Mars retrograde in the sign of Cancer by meditating on the element of water. I think this is also appropriate to do today because the sun is entering Pisces, the moon is in Scorpio, there's something of a Grand Water Trine forming, not exactly by degree, but by whole sign. So with so much water in the air, and as we reach this culmination point of a Mars retrograde cycle in a water sign, I felt like, yeah, let's talk about water for a little bit. And I have some special guests that are going to appear. This is Tina the Teardrop. And I have some other little creatures I'm going to show you. And I'm going to tell you also in one little part of today's talk how I use Tina the Teardrop to convey something about the element of water to my little girls. So on that note, before we get into it today, remember to like and subscribe. We have this goal of trying to get to 80,000 subscribers on the channel. My goal was by the spring equinox. We're about halfway there. I'm not sure we'll get 5,000 more by the spring equinox, but why not try? If you listen to the channel regularly and are not yet subscribed, it's free to do so, and it really does help us grow the work and the community. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. Coming up this Thursday night is my next webinar. I do a monthly webinar. And this month, if you go to the events page on the Nightlight Astrology website, click on Live Talks, you'll see Venus Through the Fire, Unpacking the Mystery and Magic of Venus Retrogrades. This is going to be an exploration of all of the interesting dynamics of Venus's synodic cycle, which will help you explore the placement of Venus by phase in your chart, as well as understanding Venus retrogrades. And we do have a big one coming up in March. So this ought to be useful. When you register, you get the link to attend the webinar on Thursday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it live, you do get the recording afterwards. You can watch or listen on your own time. All right, on that note, let me show you why we're talking about water today. I'm going to put the real-time clock up. Now, let's notice, first of all, that here we are, Tuesday, February 18th. We have got the waning balsamic moon in the sign, waning gibbous moon in the sign of Scorpio. And we also have Mars finishing its retrograde in Cancer, and a huge abundance of planets in Pisces, including the sun, who's just entered the sign of Pisces today. Moon and Mars have mutual reception, being in each other's signs, very watery, and a nice day, I think, to reflect on what water brings us, the magic and mystery and beauty of the element of water. Now, this is not meant to be exhaustive. I have 5 things to talk about today, and I'm sure we could add probably 100 more things about water to the list. Water has been talked about as something symbolic and elemental in many different traditions, from the Chinese medicine tradition to Ayurveda and the Western esoteric traditions for thousands of years, what to speak of all of the other indigenous traditions from all over the planet who have given spirit and voice to the element of water in so many unique ways. So again, like nothing when I talk about a symbol like water is meant to be completely definitive. I mean, it's like this huge mandala that we're looking at of images and associative meanings that we can tap into when we invoke the element of water. But 5 things that water teaches us. These are in no particular order. Before I do this, I want to introduce you to these little characters. I'm only going to use one of them today, but I thought I'd introduce you to them in general because I think I told you around the time Venus was sextiling Pluto that my daughters love gross stuff, and a very appropriate Venus way of connecting Venus and Pluto for little kids is like bathroom humor, potties and toots and all that good stuff. So anyway, let me introduce you to a few characters. So this is Elaine Earwax. They've all got very unique names. This is a little piece of earwax named Elaine. She tells stories at bedtime, all sorts of interesting, funny, gross stories. This is Bobby McBarf in Your Mouth. He he also tells very unique stories. And my daughter had an experience one time that led to her creating this, where she said, "Mom, I just threw up, but it went into my mouth and I didn't come out of my mouth. And then I swallowed it again." And we all cracked up so hardcore. And then Bobby McBarf in Your Mouth got created. This is Earl the Poop. Earl the Poop. He is the first and original of the gross storytelling members of our family. Earl Poop. And this is Achilles. We were explaining the story of Achilles to our oldest daughter And she thought it would be funny to make a mythological character called Apelles. He is a pea drop. And there's a whole elaborate story about how he became a pea drop in a famous battle. Oh, God. Anyway, he's fun. He tells stories too. Okay, so, and this is Tina Teardrop. My younger daughter, Summer, made this one. She's supposed to be kind of like a cloud and misty, and she's a teardrop. And this one I actually used to tell a story about water, and I've used Tina to tell some good stories about water and the symbolism of water to my girls. Now, I've found this is really important. A tip if you're going to do something like this: don't be too literal, right? You have to come up with stories that convey something of the symbolism by showing, not telling. This is something I learned in creative writing, in graduate school for creative writing. Show me, don't tell me, which is a way of conveying something through stories and images, myths and metaphors. The poetry. I mean, it's when you sit down with a friend and you go, I was at the spa and I was sitting in a steam room, but there was this woman who was sitting next to me and she was breathing like an elephant. And I was so annoyed. You tell a story. Maybe that's mean. But you tell a story like that, when you convey it through an image, like breathing like an elephant, your friend laughs and they can imagine and so forth. We are poetic beings. We tell stories through images and suggestions and metaphors. So to convey something about water, it's good to tell a story. It's good to, for kids to grasp. It's actually easier in some ways to tell stories than to just be like, water means this and water means that. It's not like a Ted Andrews Animal Speaks book. Not that isn't filled with great information, but like, I'd much prefer that we invoke some good stories about foxes than have our daughters read a paragraph about what a fox means. Do you know what I'm saying? And then later, of course, when we have invoked a symbolic imagination, books like that can be still very useful, I think. But anyway, get the point. Off my soapbox, onto our 5 things that water teaches us. Let me get my camera to focus. There we go. Okay. Number 1, grief, pain, and suffering are also fertile and creative. So one of the things that water has represented for thousands of years in astrology is the processing of grief and sadness and loss and pain and suffering. This world is a watery world insofar as we're in a valley of tears. We live in a valley where impermanence and change and loss and grief and suffering and the mystery of why certain kinds of suffering happens, or why sickness falls upon us, or why we have to live with loss and grief, or why mortality is a thing. These are all things that we tend to process instinctually, emotionally, through grief, through tears, through deep feelings. And it's a very watery part of life. Life is thought of as something that comes in and through water, and life in this valley is filled with suffering. However, one of the things that has long been said and taught to us by so many great mystics and poets and artists is that grief and loss and pain and tears are also fertile. So, Tina the Teardrop, whenever she talks, it's interesting. I don't know why I gave her this voice. I just did. But whenever she talks very quietly. She likes to whisper. My name is Tina, and I only tell stories in a whisper. So she's of all the characters, they all have different voices, but Tina's is a whisper. I won't do the whole whispering thing. But so Tina told them a story, and it went like this. Tina was the first creature. This is completely made up, by the way. Tina was the very first creature on Earth. Before there were any creatures, she crawled out of the water, and she was kind of like a fish, but kind of like an animal. And she came onto the land, and she looked around, and there was nobody there. And she got really, really sad. And she didn't even know what sadness was. It was the first feeling she had ever really felt, noticing that she was alone, that she was by herself. And so she started crying. And from her tears, they went into the earth, and they started out from the tears in the earth, started growing all of these vines, and they started spreading all over. And out of the vines came all of these plants and flowers and trees and animals. All of the beings and magical, interesting creations started popping up everywhere. So that's basically the gist of how the story works. And what I concluded with was saying that our emotions are very powerful. Even when you feel sadness, your sadness can be the start of something really creative. Your sadness can go into a piece of art, or it can go into music, or it can go into making something. So that's a very brief little bedtime story that came from Tina the Teardrop. Thank you, everybody. But it's a simple truth that I don't have no idea where that story came from, an amalgamation of stuff in my head. And but that's the truth. As we are at the culminating point of a very watery cycle on a very watery day, I think it's important to remember that many of us during such a cycle may have experienced the valley of tears, the watery reality of impermanence, the instinctual fears and anxieties that we live with as tentative beings who know we are not entirely safe. We can only be safe to a certain extent. Safety is a relative thing. Mortality is a promise for everybody, right? So how do we live in this sacred, tentative space? One way that we do so is to recognize that our emotions can power great acts of creativity. I find whether it's playing my guitar or writing or creating these talks or coming up with something to do with, my kids at bedtime, that finding a way to let my emotions, my fears, my anxieties fuel something creative is one of the best uses. I think of it very simply like the blues music or gospel music or jazz or any kind of music that is about channeling some of the grittiest parts of being human and being alive into a form of expression. So one promise of a watery cycle, even if it's been really difficult, even if the Mars retrograde in Cancer has been really hard, or today with moon in Scorpio, it's a tough moon placement. Sometimes it brings up deep, heavy, intense feelings and emotions or emotional catharsis. But these waters are fertile. These waters are creative, and we all come from water in a way. We all return to water. In a recent chapter of the book that I'm writing, I wrote about how my family dog made his way down to a pond near our home, near my grandfather's home. He has an artesian, well-fed pond in his backyard. He did. And he made his way down there to lay next to the water to die when it was his time. We come from the waters of the womb. This place is watery. And if we're able to see that water in both, reflecting both life and death, and to see them connected on a continuum of creation, then we can tap into the fertile power of emotion. And that's something that is valuable to know, that my emotions are not good or bad. They are powerful and creative. That can be taken in different ways. So that's something to remember right now for all of us. Even little kids can understand that for sure. The second thing that I've been thinking about with water is that being alive is naturally like an exhausting process. There's a way in which we exert ourselves psychically, emotionally, physically, every single day. And I mean, when you're a kid, I think about how my kids hate going to bed. They're like, no, if they could stay up forever, they would, and then eventually they'd fall over and fall asleep. But one of the things that has been happening for me during this Mars retrograde has been a heightened awareness within my training regimen, as kind of a hobby bodybuilding thing, to prioritize rest and recovery. It's something that's always been a part of my process, but not something that I've taken as seriously as the actual lifting or cardio or diet, let's say. So the rest and recovery, we need to rest well, we need to recover well, and we need to nourish ourselves. Water as an element refers to things that truly deeply quench our thirst, because we have a natural way of emptying our cup out every single day. And there's a lot of rhetoric, and not all of which I find problematic, but some of it I do. And it's the rhetoric of self-care, like take care of yourself, prioritize yourself, give something to yourself. And there's a way in which the whole gospel of self-care can become quite narcissistic. And I'm only reflecting on this as someone who's been, in communities, like leading various communities, yoga studio for 10 years. And the way that people will sometimes utilize that self-care gospel for a reinforcement of some really selfish and often self-destructive tendencies is sometimes problematic. So a self-care gospel without real nourishment and also a kind of humbleness, not a self-effacing kind of humility, but like an appropriate level of humbleness, is something it's frankly, it's hard to develop. It's hard to find. And it's something that, yeah, I'm not going to get on a soapbox about it any more than I already have. But what I'm trying to say is we need things like whole foods. Um, it's hard to overeat, or like harm ourselves if we're eating healthy, clean, organic whole foods. Not to, again, be preachy, but it's hard to really harm ourselves if we're getting enough sleep and drinking water, putting, soda away and like drinking water. So there's just simple things like water to me is one way of thinking about water is how pure and simple and nourishing and refreshing and quenching it is. And so water becomes emblematic for everything that is simple, clean, and nourishing. And I think, it's so easy because of how it's easy to feel drained and in a state of depletion emotionally, energetically, psychically. And then sometimes we reach for the things that are not actually going to fill us up or quench our thirst rather than, rest. Maybe we have too much stimulation putting into our heads all the time through our phones or something we're watching right before bed, and then it's hard to rest. Or I think one of the things that I've learned as I've aged in terms of my own capacity for self-care, like real healthy habits, is that they are deceptively simple. Whole foods, water, sleep, movement. I mean, I work out, but there's a million ways to move your body. There's a million ways to care for your inner life. But if we don't do those simple things every single day and we neglect the care, then we run on empty, and then we feel so depleted and so drained that it makes it so much more tempting and easy to reach for things that won't actually sustain us, like quick fixes. So one of the things that I think I've seen a lot of people in my sphere, that classroom, social media encounters through the past couple of months of this retrograde. And the thing that I notice is, how people talk about feeling depleted and drained. And a Mars retrograde in a sign like Cancer can be about getting in touch with those self-undermining habits. Like, I don't know how to take care of myself kind of thing. And I've got to get better at it. And not just I'm going to prioritize myself and doing whatever I want, but I'm going to prioritize myself in terms of really figuring out what heals and brings me nourishment. Like, what is that? And they're so simple, like just like water is simple. So anyway, okay. And by the way, I know that anytime we talk about self-care and nourishment and things like diet or exercise or rest or whatever, that it's complicated. A lot of people have serious afflictions that need something more than these simple things. I understand that, and I'm certainly not trying to, be overly simplistic. But I think one of the gifts of water is how simple the healthiest things usually are. And even if we add those things to the most complex of situations, they tend to help those complex situations be just a little less complex. So anyway, let's move on to this one, which is connecting to others through feelings is a part of how we feel healthy and alive. So one of the qualities of water is that it runs, like if you think of water like running downward to pool together, water has a collectivity to it. And although we have personal feelings, and it's important to have a relationship with our inner life and our emotions so that we feel like we're whole somehow. It's like emotional health and feeling whole is about how we work with and allow different emotions to exist and sort of flow together. And so there's this like inner level at which we're developing something like emotional wholeness inside. I don't know what else to call it. But on an external level too, it's really important that we are able to share in instinctual, physical, emotional connections with other people. could be joy or happiness. It could be interest and curiosity. It could be entertainment and fun. It could be romance or sensuality. It could be creativity. Like if you play music together with other human beings, it feels really, really good. You feel other people and they feel you. Or if you, like with my girls, something as simple as putting a puzzle together, which is something we love to do. Or sometimes we, Ashley and I will just take the dog for a walk to get away from the kids and have a little bit of alone time for ourselves for 20 minutes, those moments where you get to connect and feel. And when someone's telling me something that they're going through, I feel it, and then they feel what I'm going through. And it's important that we be able to connect in feeling with other beings. And one thing that I'll say, again, maybe at the risk of getting on a soapbox here, is that I'm not sure how much of that is possible purely through social media or internet contacts. I think that there are many ways to think about how we connect with other people. So I don't mean to say it's impossible, but I do think that there's something, again, to the simplicity of water, so simple and so basic, about just sharing meaningful emotional contact with other human beings in the flesh. I know that for me, it's a very different experience than the kinds of connections I have through Zoom classrooms or, obviously this is like my workspace too. So that's something as well, but you know what I mean? Even chatting or texting with people, there's a kind of connection there. It's not like it's fake or unreal completely, but you know what it's like when you actually share a nice, I don't know, you go out for coffee or dinner with someone that you're friends with and you feel each other, you feel what's going on. If there's one thing that a cycle like this in water can teach us, it is the importance of making sure that we have healthy, harmonious, emotional contacts with other beings, because that's part of how we feel healthy and alive. It's part of how we repair and heal and nurture ourselves. It's as though to share and to exchange feeling with other beings is part of how we also rest, recover, and nourish ourselves. And I think that sometimes cycles like this just show us that certain relationships are not doing that, or can't do that, or are hindering that, or they aren't the right ones, or something like that. I mean, sometimes these kinds of transits are about recognizing that this relationship is actually a place where I can't feel and share, or I don't feel safe to, or I always end up feeling bad. That feedback is also important, because I think the point of this idea, or this one on my list here, is just that you have to have some healthy exchanges. It doesn't mean that the topics have to be happy, but you have to leave feeling like I connected. There was a healthy bonding of feeling that took place between living beings. How does that happen? Number 4 is releasing negative feelings can be done without avoidance. This is something that I think is really important, because I think we all know that negative feelings are part of life. Grief, pain, suffering. We started off talking about how those things can be fertile and creative. There's also a way in which we have to. It's like I watch this all the time with my girls, and actually, Tina Teardrop has had something to say about this with my younger daughter, who's got a Pisces moon. She's super, super sensitive and sweet and emotional. She gets really stuck sometimes in a feeling or a mood. And so we were, it's like, it's not like we force her, oh, this is how you should feel, or that's it. We try to let her just feel what she feels. But I used Tina to talk about how we can honor and acknowledge an emotion and really feel it. And then when it's time, we can have the ability to let it go, to let it flow on. Sometimes we're such loving, accepting beings that we think to let go of a negative emotion would mean that I'm avoiding or denying or ignoring or rejecting some part of myself. And that can be true if we try to avoid negative emotions entirely and don't look at them, don't experience them, don't acknowledge them. And then there's also this place that we need to be able to get to where we say, okay, I've felt you, I've acknowledged you, I've tried to listen, and now I'm going to release. I'm just going to release that. So how do we, acknowledge what we're feeling, allow for what we're feeling, and then know how and when it's time to let it go? And that's going to look different for every single human, right? Every single being is going to do that dance differently and feel those feelings and make those choices at different times and in different ways, which is often part linked to a creative process, by the way. So it's not like it needs to look one way for all beings, or that we all should be cookie cutters doing something in some kind of Zen way. But I think one lesson from water is, especially like a Mars retrograde in Cancer, is when is it time to just let something go? To let go of something that has been difficult, or something that you've been fearing, or something that's been haunting you emotionally. And how and when do we simply let go and say, okay, I've listened, I've heard, but if I continue to let you be here, your presence will be a burden, or it will create disease within me. So there's a way in which, for emotions to be creative, we need to let them flow along. We can't hold or keep or get stuck too long. That would mean to create something like a stagnant pool of water. And that's, it's kind of like an image of where disease grows, right? So, something to think about. And then finally on my list is watch for the quality of water. Okay, so this is a wild story I have to tell you guys, but Mars, when it was going direct through Cancer, I think it was about October, in my third house, right? Your local neighborhood, your, kind of like the local culture and environment. When Mars was going through there, we found out that there was going to be construction in our neighborhood due to some issue in whatever it is, the water piping or the water delivery, because there's some toxins that they discovered in the water. So like, we had our water tested. They allowed everyone to get free testing, and it was like there was like lead in the water. I don't know what it was, but it was some toxin. It was like, okay. So ever since then, of course, we've used I think it's a Berkey. It's like a water filter, and we have filtered water and stuff like that. But it was like, okay, we need to think a little bit more seriously about the quality of water. So we were looking into some kind of filtration system, maybe for the kitchen sink, or like whatever. And this is all so appropriate for Mars retrograde in the third house in a water sign, right? Like the quality of the local water in your neighborhood. So then my trainer actually said, have you ever thought about getting a spring water delivery service? Spring water is great. It doesn't, the filtered water, he was saying, can strip some of the minerals out of the water, and they're actually really good for you. So you might think about just getting like a spring water delivery service for, at least for like your daily drinking water. And I was like, huh. So my wife and I looked into it. Ashley and I, we said, okay, so we did it. Now, I'm not kidding you. This is happening as Mars is slowing down to station and turn direct right now. We got the spring water delivered, and I drank that water, and I swear to God, it was like a psychedelic experience. I'm not one to like sensationalize stuff like this. I've had enough psychedelic experiences to know when I'm in an altered state. And I swear to God, you guys, I had like an altered state kind of experience with this water. The first thing I noticed right away, this is going to sound weird, but I don't know if I'd ever really drank spring water before. I feel like I have, but like I didn't ever have this kind of realization anyway. But I was like, oh my God, this water feels thicker and denser. And I'm sure that's like the minerals, right? But then I started feeling like it was like charged electrically. And then I started having this awareness of the water in my body feeling different than normal filtered water. And I started feeling what was, I can only describe it. It doesn't sound so corny, you guys. I'm sorry, but I have to be real. I started feeling what was like the voice of water being like, yeah, I'm from the earth. Like I'm loaded with minerals. I come up through the earth, and I have the charge of the earth in me. And that's what you're feeling and noticing. Cause I really did feel it. I was like, this feels really different. This is hydrating me in a way that feels different. And I'm a pretty sensitive person. Like obviously I'm a Cancer sun in that third house. And I was just like, wow, this is really shocking. So one of my biggest Mars retrograde takeaways on a super mundane level was this weird thing that happened in my local neighborhood with the water, and shifting to natural spring water delivery in glass bottles. So you don't have to burn through the plastic, and you just swap out. They come every so many weeks and swap out your 5-gallon glass bottles. And there's a little dispenser it came with. We were like, okay, This is nuts. I feel like I am drinking real water, and I don't know what I've been drinking. Now, I'm not saying that the rest of the water isn't real. I'm just saying that's how I felt drinking this stuff. I was like, it was incredible. Um, I know I'm not selling it or anything like that. I'm just seriously telling you about my experience. So I put this very literally, like, watch for the quality of the water. In fact, I started having this like weird intuitive thing. Um, I guess Neptune is about to move into Aries, and I thought, I wonder if people are going to start fighting over water. It was the first time I'd ever thought something like that. Typically, I don't think about things like that, but I was like, there's a difference between real water and like toxic and water. Like I know that's a thing, but it was the first time I ever really experienced it in my body. This is something that I wonder about as a natural resource. I wonder what's going to happen with the direction of water on our planet. It can be kind of weirdly, I'm really not the activist type, but I suddenly felt very defensive and protective over water, having this kind of mineral water in my body. So it was a very profound experience for me. This happened as Mars was retrograding through the trine with Saturn in Pisces as well in my 11th house. So maybe I was tapping into some kind of collective concern over the health of water, the future of water on our planet, or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, one very literal thing is that I never thought it would be this literal, but I think it's important to actually consider the quality of water that we're drinking, um, because it's obviously a huge part of what we need every day. I've heard one formula being, half your weight in ounces. So if you weigh 180, it'd be 90 ounces per day or something like that. I don't know. There's lots of different advice for how much water to drink, but the point is, watch for the quality of your water. I think that's important. And I'm not trying to say go get spring water. I'm just a general thing that this made a big impact on me, and it was one of my biggest takeaways from Mars's retrograde. I'm someone who drinks water. I do not drink soda, but this was like, whoa, I'm drinking a totally different kind of water. This is really different. It tastes like earth. Anyway, so the other thing, though, is that we can take this metaphorically. Watch for the quality of the water. If you have ever noticed when you're dreaming at night that you become lucid, and there will be some part of the environment that is playing a role that's playing a role in your dream. Let me give you a simple example, because I had one recently that's kind of funny. I was in this dream. I was laying on a highway in like the Arctic. I don't know, it's weird, but and I was like freezing. Um, well, and I was laying next to a dog, and it was just a dog, and the dog was shivering and like peeing on the highway, and I was laying next to it, and I was like, what? And I'd become lucid. And all of a sudden, I became aware, as the lucidity sort of raised me out of my sleep, that there was one of our the window in our bedroom. This is during Minnesota winter, had like a little crack at the top, and it had come down a little bit, so there was cold air coming in, and I wasn't like well covered up, and I really had to pee. So I closed the window. I got up to pee. I put on a sweatshirt. I was like, all right, I gotta warm up, and I gotta pee, because I'm laying on a frozen highway with a peeing dog in my dream. But that is very much the way that psychedelic spaces work, where the imagery and the feelings and the sequences of visions that come up are often connected to things that have happened in our lives that we start being able to see the connections to, which is what makes psychedelic experiences so powerful therapeutically. For so many people, they put things together because of the suggestive imagery, just like being awake for your dreams and being able to see the connections between things that are coming through visually and in your feeling body in connection to your biography and events that have happened and stuff like that. So it's very therapeutic for many people for that reason. But the point is that you don't need psychedelics to start getting in touch with those kinds of connections. Dream work is one way to do it. There's so many. Meditation often makes you more aware of those kinds of connections, but so too does this simple water quality test. You can just stop at any point in time and say, how am I feeling right now? This is something that Tina does with our girls. Tina says, how are you feeling right now? She says, as a little teardrop of water, I am someone who likes to think about how I'm feeling. At any given point, I can stop and say, how am I My girls love it. They get down. They're so excited. They're so interested. She's whispering. They really have to listen. And the reason that I think probably unconsciously I chose that voice, like I had no idea why I chose it. I just did. But I think one of the reasons why, if you think about the history of astrology, water signs were said to be quiet or mute, which meant that they were sometimes secretive or subtle. And so emotions are like that too. And a simple water quality test we can run at any point in time is like, how am I feeling right now? Before I make a decision, before I do the next thing, before I answer what someone's asking me, let me just check in. My wife is super good at this. She's a Cancer rising. She developed this skill throughout her life as a yoga teacher. And this is something that we do with our girls too. And it's a very simple thing you can do for yourself that is a huge part of how we daily take care of ourselves. Just right now, how am I feeling? What's the quality of the water, And you can feel, oh, this feeling, that feeling, and getting in touch with it is like getting in touch with the spring water, the real thing. Well, that's what I'm really feeling. And then if we learn how to deal with that and how to work with what we're actually feeling, there's so much emotional intelligence there that can guide us. Cycles like these that we've been through are great for all of these things. So I hope that this has been a useful, interesting episode with some thoughts and meditations on water. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And I look forward to seeing you guys again tomorrow to continue unpacking some of the transits of the week.